Hum inside my heart a little while. Come closer with the honey of your song. Your dance is a code, is a pathway to what's given. I am learning how to listen.
Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning in today. I have a very special guest I am so excited to introduce to all of you. Her name is Colynn Vosburgh. I originally met Colynn back in a couple years ago now. She came to teach the anatomy section of a yoga teacher training I was offering, and since then, she has been such an inspiration, and it is so amazing to have her here sharing her story and wisdom with all of you. So, more about her. Her teachings are a fusion of her education and experiences in life, the medical field, conscious community, and personal development work. Colin creates and holds space that she has dubbed queer friendly, age friendly, body friendly, and completely inclusive. Her approach as a yoga instructor is deeply based on the concept that she is not a healer, rather a space holder, and that through doing her own work and healing her own soul, she is able to provide a space for you to do your work and heal yourself. So, without further ado, I am so excited to share with you our conversation. So, before we begin, may we all take some time to ground into this space and into ourselves. Let's begin by taking a deep inhale through the nose and exhale out the mouth. Thank you all so much. Let's begin. So, hello, Colynn. Thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I've been truly inspired by your story for such a long time, so it's such an honor to have you here on this space.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mhm. What's your story? How did you get here?
Okay. I have this question constantly in yoga teacher training because we have to decide like what is it we're going to share. And every time I think about like the step before this one, there's always a step before that one. So I do like to start like I was born. And I was born to two parents that probably shouldn't have had children. Um, and there were three of us for one of them and four of us for another. I'm the oldest, and I have a little sister and a little brother. And then when I was older, I found out that there was another sister in there, in between my sister and my brother. That being said, the reason I mention it is because it's such a big part of my story. Growing up with a pretty physically abusive mom, and somewhat of a unstable, I like the only way I could describe it is like pervy dad. Um, and that was like I didn't know anything was wrong with it. So as we continued to grow up, I just kind of figured it was like that with everybody else. And so it's like the way that they raised us really like continues to be the parts of why I think I'm wild and parts of why I think I'm strong and parts of why I think I'm pretty fearless when it comes to things. So yeah, it was like we had fun, but it was a not cool childhood, but still kind of cool. Like when the parents weren't around or when they were being cool, things were really awesome. And when it wasn't, it was really terrible. And that was kind of like where I started my role, is taking care of people, I would say. I took care of my sister. My sister was like the beautiful one, the thin one, the frail one. And I was like the tough one. And so if my mom got upset, um, if my mom, with her, I would step in and kind of like stop things. And I know that a lot of like my story later in life came from my dad and the fact that he always told me what the perfect woman was. You know, the perfect woman has a thigh gap. The perfect woman, to him was actually rather like thin, very, very thin. And that's just never been a part of who I am. So right off the bat, like I'm not the perfect woman and I have to take care of people. So that yeah precipitated as I like got into a relationship when I was young with a man that was, you know, somewhat similar to my father, quite controlling, and we had a couple kids and we started a farm, and we enjoyed that. But that's where I found yoga. I had found yoga when I was a little bit younger, but it was just kind of a bit of a joke, but also kind of worked. I hid it from people that I did it. I don't even know if you know, but there's this woman named Shirley MacLaine. And she's like an actress, and she was really into yoga and meditation. And so my parents had a video of her, and I would like sneak watch it. Um, and I found just like I slept better and I had a bit more peace. Um, and then I was living in northern British Columbia, the middle of nowhere. And I was like in the local market one day and I found a video, and it was Rodney Yee. He's my first teacher. I brought it home and I loved it so much that I then like Sears catalog mail ordered in tons more Gaiam videos. And that was like my practice, my exercise practice, my like life practice, because at that same time I was just having my first baby, and it was my turn to go to work because my husband was a logger, and he was home now. So it was also time for me to find a job, and I didn't want to waitress anymore. So I got this job as a homemaker. So I started in like the healthcare field. And I remember when I was younger, my dad had said, like, if you go to nursing school, I'll pay for it. And then I took a year off and had a baby. And it was like 3 years later when I finally went back to nursing school. But that step right there, when my daughter was just born, she was 3 months old, I needed to go to work. And my husband and his mom were going to take care of my daughter. So I started working, taking care of people. First, it was like helping them shop and cleaning their houses. And then as I kind of like got to know more, then it was more personal care. And then I kind of did like my upgrades. I started working in the hospital. I was a care aide. I didn't want to do that for long because I noticed that the older care aides like were their bodies were pretty used up. And, you know, lifting bodies, I think, for all your years really does that to you, especially improperly. So I decided I needed to nurse in order to not have to do so much lifting and personal care. So I slowly upgraded. I did my LPN, and then I did my RN. And a lot of this was rural. It was in a very small town. And if there was any trauma, I pretty much knew the people. And people were telling me like, you're sick, because I'd come to work and I'd be like, 5-car pileup. But the problem is like any of the people in the car I would know. So I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to move to the city and have trauma all the time. By then I had 2 kids. We had like a flourishing farm in Bella Coola, BC. And I convinced my husband to move, and we went to Abbotsford. So Abbotsford has like a trauma center. And I continued to grow in my nursing. I travel nursed. I did my ER specialty. And I got to go to a studio, like an actual yoga studio, like in real life with a live teacher. And I found that awesome. And I also found it frustrating because Rodney Yee is Iyengar based. So very alignment focused. He's very use props. And I found that like I had great alignment and I was seeing students in the studio, they didn't. And the pace was a lot faster. So Vinyasa was coming out as more popular than Hatha. And I just kind of noticed that, but whatever. I decided I wanted to do my teacher training. That'd be awesome. I get better at the poses, better at yoga. That was my whole goal. And at the same time, I was like suffering in the emergency room. I didn't want to do it anymore. I was burnt out. And I was looking at the doctors and thinking like, I want to do that. They get paid like so much more and they don't have to do anything. I need to do that. So I did. I applied to get into med school and I was accepted, and I was like starting in a couple terms or whatever. And I got the funding and I did all that stuff, and I was preparing, finding a mentor, getting all my licenses and stuff. And I got this message saying, hey, we had a sudden dropout, that there's a seat left. You're ready. You have everything that we need. Do you want to take the seat? And if yes, like, you start in a week. And I was like, okay, let's go for it. But hold on, I have yoga teacher training. So I called the studio like, hey, can I get my money back? They're like, no. Okay, I'll do both then. So I went to yoga teacher training and for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then on Monday, med school started. And I remember walking in on Friday and I'm like, I'm Colynn, and I'm here to be better at yoga. and, and that was it. I'm starting med school. I'm going to be a doctor, like all this stuff. And by Sunday, I knew, like, I think I made a mistake. Like, I think I'm done with the healthcare field. But like, I now had a mortgage out on my education. So, and I had convinced my whole family to support me. I had sold some like machinery that I owned in order to be able to pay for it. So I continued on the journey. I continued with my YTT. I had a family, and I started med school. And I mean, it was a lot. And eventually yoga teacher training came to an end. It was a part-time in person. So 4 months later, I remember I was graduating and I said to my teacher, like, what do I do? I don't want to go to med school. I don't want to be in the healthcare field anymore. And she said, what do you want? And it was like, I think that I'm supposed to teach yoga. And I wasn't ever planning on teaching. And she said, you know what? All you have to do is find out what number you need to make and then set that goal and then make it. And it felt like just that simple. Like, that's all I have to do. Now I know an emerge doc makes about $20,000 a month. So in my head, I'm like, okay, well, I gotta make $20,000 a month and then I'm good. I don't need to go to med school anymore. And I set off to do that. I started building my yoga business. And going to school and working and raising my family. And there came a point after about a year and a half that I was sitting there pretty much matching my nursing income with yoga. And I couldn't do anything else. Like, my life was so full that I had to make a decision. I hired a coach, a business coach. And within 3 months, I quit med school and my nursing career, like literally just quit. And with 3 months after that, I was making $20,000 a month teaching yoga. So, that was, it felt so easy and it happened so easy. I stuck to what my teacher had taught me. I learned that yoga was so much more than I thought it was. The studio practice, the asana, that's it, right? And then some like philosophical stuff that people say in class. Well, it was a little bit more than that. And I taught full time. And as soon as I was done my teacher training, my teacher said to me, hey, what do you think about teaching anatomy for the teacher training? Because the anatomy that I got, it wasn't really that good. For me, I enjoyed it. It wasn't like helpful for students that didn't have a basic understanding. And so then I just started teaching in teacher trainings immediately out of my own teacher training. And that was eventually where I really started to focus, was teaching in teacher trainings with the specialty of teaching anatomy. And eventually came to a place where my kids moved out, where I was with someone I didn't want to be with anymore. And I just sold everything and went on a walkabout, first to Peru for a couple weeks, and then made my way to Costa Rica. and I just never left. Like I'm here now. This is where we're talking from. And there's so much more to the story, but like I think those are the main points. That's what I do now. I don't often teach studio classes. I'm more into passing on the philosophy, the anatomy, the alignment, like what I think is important as a teacher, to create a complete class that's inclusive and safe and all of those things.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. What a powerful story
Thank
you've been writing for years.
you. Yeah.
Um, yeah, thank you for your vulnerability and authenticity and sharing, from childbirth and or from childhood and what really drove you to where you are now. I think that that's such an important piece that's commonly overlooked these days. Um, you know, being a yoga teacher, people are always like, "Oh, you must have all your shit together." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" That's not what brought me here. So thank you for like that's what I love about you and I find you so inspiring is that you're so raw and you're willing to like show those parts of yourself. And I think that that's where we really need right now are leaders who are willing to say, we're not 100% perfect. Nobody is. So how do we use the tools that we were blessed with in this life to move forward and find that orientation? So yeah, so thank you for all of that. And I know I've known you for a few years now. We met through a teacher training that we were co-teaching together. You came and taught the anatomy part, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I've gone to watch some of your stories unfold through social media. And one thing that has always, again, inspired me about you is that idea of abolishing the perfect woman. And I know that you brought that up in your story again. And so I would love to hear more on that idea of the perfect woman and how you find that correlates with the modern yoga practice and also how you have found ways to escape that paradigm.
Oh, I mean, those are great questions. So eloquently worded too. Sometimes I wish I was like I could be better with my words because I find I fumble a lot. So I feel like coming into the business world, because then within the yoga, like I really focused on the business and like, what can I be an expert in? And clearly I'm an expert in anatomy. And so then I just kept like going down that route. And within the business community, it's really like, look at people's pain points and then show them how you can solve them. And it's like, that grosses me out. Like I understand and also ew, because those pain points are like also my pain points. And if I try to sell that I know how to fix it feels so inauthentic to me. I have had like crippling fear. I have imposter syndrome. I'm a person in a big body. I've fought my weight. I've fought my head. I've fought relationship. Like I don't have anything figured out. And I remember one time my sister posted on Facebook, and she said something about coaches, because I do a lot of coaching as well. Something about how coaches aren't good coaches um, if they have a messy life. And I messaged her like, dude, no. And she's like, well, I wasn't talking about you. And I'm like, yeah, but that's like your judgment. The truth is that like, who does have that perfect life? Like nobody that I've ever met can give me this amazing story that's as pretty as their Instagram. And what I've known being myself and being, I think, vulnerable and sharing is that people are also vulnerable and share with me. Like, I know lots of people have this experience, but like you walk up to someone and they're like, hi, and then they just tell you their whole life and they're like crying and you're like, oh, okay, well, thanks for sharing. Like, where did that come from? And that's always been since I was young. I've been open about my sex life. I've been open about my relationships and if I'm happy or not happy in them. And I've also been very self-aware I think it's doing a lot of acid as a teenager, but like I've been self-aware and take like personal responsibility for a lot of things, which I thought also was very common, and have come to realize that it's not at all. And I think that coming from that place then offers people the opportunity to recognize like we don't have to be perfect all the time, and we're not always right, and we all have a lot of shit. So where I started to share from on my journey that like became public was like what really happened to me. It's not like you have this pain point and I can fix it, because I can't fix anything, let alone fix my own self. But what I do know is like via the Socratic method, right, which is asking questions until the person comes up with their own answer, that I don't know any better what you need in your life than you do. And like inherently, if we go back to, I love the name of the podcast, like the Lost Sutras. If we go back to the sutras and we look at the kleshas first and foremost, or kleshas, if we look at like number one, the reason the kleshas being obstacles to happiness or reasons for suffering, number one is like avidya, it's ignorance. It's like you've forgotten who you truly are. And so what does that mean? Well, I've always taken it as like in the non-dualistic way of yoga is like I'm God. And I would never sit there and tell God that God was fat, or God was a piece of shit, or God was stupid, or like any of those things. In fact, like my opinion of what God or energy or the universe is like the complete opposite. And if I'm a part of that, then there's no way that I am that. And that's my battle always with my ego and myself. And so if I just call out my ego all the time, that puts me in a place where I can be more open to consciousness, more open to love, and then move from that place. And that's where the vulnerability comes from. It's like when I have been in my lowest, it's been people are like will hit on my pain points, like, and then charge me $700 to like help me, and it never really does. And then I feel gaslit at the end, because then the person's like, well, that's on you, because if you showed up this way, then everything would have been okay. But like, like, how is this your own fault that you whatever happens in those? And that's not how I like to roll. I think that in general, we're all a bunch of messes. Like, I don't even know if we can swear, but I'm usually like, we're all effed up. There's just different levels of effed up, and that includes me. And sometimes I'll meet people based on the way that I talk or that I lecture, and they think that I have it figured out. And that's unfortunate, because you know what? One day you're going to realize I'm a normal person. And then the only thing that can happen to me is that I fall off this pedestal and I just go like crashing down. And so I think like I've done that to people, like, oh my God, you're so amazing, you have it figured out. And then something happens. I'm like, oh, you're just a person like everybody else. You suck, you lie, you like, and you're amazing and all those things. And so it's like the same with me. Please just don't think I have things figured out. I don't have anything figured out. I'm a freaking mess. And then if we can relate on that level, who am I to tell you anything? I'm nobody. Yet who I am to support you in like discovering that yourself is like I'm actually really good at it. I think because of everything that I've just said. I hope I even answered what you asked me.
That was amazing. Thank you. I was definitely chuckling along with you.
Great.
Love all the shares right now. Um and yeah, a lot of what you said had so much potency. I think it's so true that coming back to the kleshas, it said that the root of all the kleshas is avidya, is that ignorance, right? And it's when we are ignorant of um the inherent or the innate wisdom that we already carry, that's where the rest of the klesha tree, the branches from the tree, take us, right? And so yeah, thank you so much for bringing that point forward. And it is true, like with marketing, and where I'm at right now is you know, working through creating yoga as a conscious business. And I feel like it has not been that way for a very long time by mainstream Western society. And it has become like a multi-billion-dollar industry every year. And a lot of people want a chunk of that cake. And so they are looking for, as you said, these pain points. And how can I sell you what you think you might need to become perfect, or to put yourself on that pedestal, or to create that gold shiny statue of yourself. And that really, I want to say irks me, but also it just makes me really deeply sad that that's where yoga has gone. Because I believe that really what yoga is connecting us back to, like you said, that purity and that harmony and that balance that we already carry. um and so yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And what I have noticed is that particularly in that marketing scheme, there's this idea that we need to be fixed, but that we also need to be perfect. And that comes along with the idea of like yoga makes you skinny and hot, right? Which I don't feel is very true. And I know that there's a lot of businesses that have been able to be very financially successful because of that. And so that's why I really, again, I'm inspired by you and how you're just so brutally honest about your beliefs and opinions around that. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. I like it's even more than that, right? It's like because 80% of all people in yoga right now, they're thin, they're white, they're women, they're middle class, and they're young. And so that's like their persona. Sometimes I've been told, like, even I'm sober, I go to AA and NA, and I was in an AA meeting and then I wasn't for the next one, and somebody brought up me. They said, "Oh, where are you coming from?" to a friend, and the friend said, "Coming from yoga." And they're like, "Oh, I know a yoga teacher that comes, but like she's not the epitome of health." And it's like I'm not sure at what point the idea of thin became the epitome of health, because it's not. Even in nursing, I was in a transition from an old hospital to a new hospital, from like an old janky like asbestos hospital to a brand new trauma center. And I remember that when we were going over one day, we were all in the ICU and we were learning the new monitors. And one woman nurse came in and she said, "Oh my gosh, you guys are not going to believe this." Now, she herself, she ran, she was vegan, she was very thin, she was very fit, she was very healthy. And she said the Americans Heart and Stroke Foundation has put out a new campaign, and you're not going to believe this. And she pulls out a string, and the string it wasn't that big. And she said, "This string is how big your waist is supposed to be in order to prove your health." And so she put it around her waist and it fit. And I put it around my thigh and it didn't fit. So you can imagine my waist is much bigger than my thigh. And this is when I started to become aware of the idea of like big bikini, like big business, and that these foundations that I had always thought were like key for my career were actually like money makers. They weren't really there to help you with your heart health, because you can be thin and lazy, and that's unhealthy. Living a sedentary lifestyle is the problem. And you can be bigger, which I have always been, and healthy. I've always eaten well. I've always been incredibly physically active. I have a bigger body. And sure, I could probably eat different at some points. And I have been discovering a lot of like my own stuff with my relationship with my body. But one thing that I know that was such a big ego thing for me was I used to teach core classes, yoga core, and I would have all these fit, thin, strong people, and it was like their core was not equivalent to my core. So I was this big girl, and you would think I would have a weak core, and all these thin people would have a strong one, and that it was the opposite. Like I would do more repetitions than they could, and they would always, it was a joke because we would like yell in class and like play music a little bit louder and do all these things, and I'd push them and they'd be like, "Enough, stop," and like, "Ah," and all of that. And I'd be like just getting started. So they way that I could even work my core to its fullest in these classes with these people because they couldn't keep up. And that was like very big for my own getting rid of my ego and then like feeling into like who I am is it's right, like it's not wrong. Because that was one thing I always thought is like, I'm not your typical yoga teacher. I shouldn't be here. And then the other piece I have in my story is that I'm also queer. And I would say that queer has not been like the most like acknowledged thing in yoga either. It's like the languaging that a lot of people use, the just the inclusivity of teachings and aesthetic yoga, like what you're supposed to look like as opposed to how you're supposed to feel. It's always turned me off. Always. I think I'm just like I was it all worked out well for me because I started with Rod D, who I think is one of the greatest teachers out there. Even though now I like listen to his languaging, I'm like, he's still so alignment based and prop friendly that it was important that those things and how I felt in my body were so much more like focused on than what I looked like. And that's like a key takeaway that I think is foundational in my classes, my teaching, my anatomy, my everything is like what you look like is actually quite irrelevant. What you feel in a pose is what we're supposed to be like focusing on.
Yeah, thank you. I just finished the teacher training last week, and that point was a difficult one to bring across. And it always is, right? Students, you'll be guiding them into the poses and especially forward folds, like Paschimottanasana. You tell them to go into that seated forward fold, and they look to the person beside them and they've got their head on their knees and they're like, oh, damn. And then they try to push themselves much further, right? And I coming back to this idea of like avidya and ignorance is how can we actually honor our truth and recognize that our bodies are all different and that it's beautiful that we need that diversity and how magical our bodies are, the inner workings of them, and maybe they look different, but they all have this like beautiful life force running through them. So how can we just really respect and honor that part of ourselves? And yeah, I totally agree with a lot of what you just said. And that idea of the sedentary lifestyle. And I think that that's a big thing with our modern society again, is that's where a lot of these imbalances are starting to be created. I constantly have students coming up to me with chronic low back pain because, they're shortened muscles in the hip flexors and the weak cores, which you are well aware of with your anatomy background. And one thing that I'm starting to recognize as well is as I'm teaching more, is the eclectic mix of constitutions that walk through the doorway. And for me, I've been exploring Ayurveda in a deeper level and understanding how that application can be brought forth into the modern classroom and really allow the poses to fit the students' bodies instead of the bodies to meet the poses, and bringing in the props and different things like that. But I would also love to hear more about your version or your idea on constitutions and differences in bodies from more of the Western medicine approach.
I I love that. I spend a lot of time like more focusing on the koshas than Ayurveda, even though I still have like this. There's a section in teacher training that I put in Ayurveda, and I'm very clear in my own constitution for sure. Um, I am I like mainly pitta, and then a little bit less, but almost equal kapha, and then I'm serious, like a two vata. And I think that it just like it expounds in like all of my teachings and everything that I share is from a very grounded but also like pitta, like fiery place. When it comes to Western medicine, because this is what I love doing, is like how can I see, so yoga, right, is science. And I remember when I first started hearing this, I was like, huh, no, it's not. Because what I hear is usually from a very vata place, like a very airy, like ungrounded, etherical place about, for example, the chakras, right? Oh, we have chakras. We have these spinning vortexes of energy within our bodies. And the base one is red and it's related to this. And like, and these very like cute etherical kind of ideas of like how the chakras fit into our life. What I learned about science from 10,000 years ago is like, oh, this is science prior to medical degrees. This is science um, prior to microscopes. And in Western medicine, we dissect dead bodies to study life. And in Eastern medicine, dissection is seen as desecration of the body. And so 10,000 years ago, these brahmacharis, these rishis, like these people were studying live bodies from an enlightened place, right? From a balanced place. So, for example, back to the chakras, what they saw was where there was more energy in the body, and it's visualized as circular because it continues to go through. So, if we look at where did the colors come from, it's amazing. The colors actually were introduced in the 70s as cultural appropriation. 7 colors to the rainbow, the Roy G. Biv. And, it makes sense. Like red is the densest color and root chakra is the densest chakra. But, since there was also the Bindu in there at the back of the head, well, we're just going to also eliminate a chakra because it doesn't fit into the marketing aspect of things. So this is what's happened. And then we continue to teach that from a place of and from a place of like this, in my opinion, this vata etherical, like ungrounded place. If we look into what the chakras are nerve plexuses within our bodies. So right in the perineum, like right in the space between the genitals and the anus, such a fun thing to say in yoga class, is our root chakra. And I mean, anyone probably knows that there's a lot of nerves down there. So they knew that. And then when we move up in the body, we have the sacral plexus. So right in the sacrum, there is a plexus of nerves coming out, heading down into the legs because there's no more spine. And Brahma Nadi, or our spinal cord, is ending there. So as we move up, the next one is solar plexus. That's right. Okay. So we have the digestive system in there, the mesentery, where there's an incredible amount of nerves running in and out, communicating with the brain, and the cardiac plexus. And then we have the cervical plexus and the vocal cords. And then when we head up into the head, we have more like glands, like the pituitary and the pineal. And so I know it's not like specific to Constitution and Ayurveda. I'm saying more of like the teachings coming from that place means that we're losing like what the science of yoga actually is. Like none of this was woohoo. None of this was made up like cosmic BS. This was all observations and ways to talk about the body so that other people could understand without cutting someone open and seeing like where the nerve plexuses were. And that's why I love also the koshas and then diving into the gunas. It's like, then we can start to see like, okay, this isn't just a bunch like of weird stuff that someone was dreaming up. And then now like, here's yogic philosophy. And then like, if you see it my way, cool. And then like, but if not, that's cool too. It's like none of it's grounded in science. And that's what yoga is. Yoga is science. And so my passion is like bringing West and East together and being like, okay, wait, the kosha is like Anamaya kosha, great. We get that. Yeah, it's the outer body. There's the bones, there's the meat, there's the blood, there's this, there's that. But when we go to pranamaya kosha, that's not an etherical body. It's not just like a subtle body inside of your skin. It's prana maya kosha. It's your life force body. It's your cardiovascular system and your respiratory system. As we dive into, and I won't get into it because I spend a lot of time teaching this, but like as we move into manamaya kosha, the mind body, that's your freaking nervous system. As we move into Vishnanamaya kosha, like your body, your actual body mind, that's your fascial system. And as we move more into the bliss body, we're still within the body. So what is that? Is that like hormones? Is that like ecstasy? Like what's that aspect of things? And so when we take Ayurveda, which is a sister science to the science of yoga, these are sciences of life, ways that we can live life. I 100% buy into all of them. Because as we look at our constitutions as parts of our personality, and then come back to yoga about being in balance, when we're out of balance, we're not well. So I'm a pitta and I crave all the things that don't help me, right? I'm from Canada. Do I live in Canada? Absolutely not. Where do I live? Costa Rica. So my pitta has brought me to have heat all the time, which it would probably be fine if I didn't like love to eat hot sauce, spicy food, spicy peppers, coffee, like garlic, onions, all the things that like actually aggravate my pitta to the point where and then I work. I don't take time to slow down and eat, and then I get an ulcer. And what is the indication of a pitta imbalance? An ulcer. And so I love how I can be like, okay, first of all, this last ulcer, which was a couple of years ago now, when I was just doing like teacher training after teacher training after teacher training, this last ulcer wouldn't go away. So I actually had to take medication. So I'm not like so far removed from the science world that I'm not going to take a medication to feel better. Right. Yet at the same time, I'm like, okay, but also, this isn't just because I drank too much coffee. Like the way that I'm living is out of balance in my pitta, and my body is actually communicating with me. And it's saying, hey, Colynn, slow down. Like either stop working or stop drinking so much coffee. Like there's that like the gunas and or bringing me into my kapha to slow down a little bit. And then maybe even I'm out of balance in my vata. How can I be so low down in there and be so against like the conscious community sometimes? Because I find them coming from this place of like the ethers is star seeds. And I'm like, dude, I can't even talk to you right now because you're so far out there. There's nothing rooted or grounded in science. And for this rant, I'm going to close it with like, one time I was reading the 7 spiritual laws of yoga or something by Deepak Chopra. And the foreword, the opening of the book was, science is the explanation of God, by God, to the human nervous system. And for me, that was like, whoa, hold on. Yes, that's where I started. Oh, I get it. Yoga is really a science. Here's how. Oh, and that just in that moment, I remember I was on like Zuma tours, taking the boat from a teacher training to my house, and it all just went, and I got it. So again, like science is the explanation of God, by God, to the human nervous system, because this human nervous system is our ego. And we like to box things up so we can understand it. And that's why I think like bringing it back to like how we understand can be very beneficial as the philosophy and way to live your life, but like still from this North American perspective of like, okay, yogis aren't just like full of it. They really have it figured out. And then here's how I translate it, because we've been taught this certain thing for so long. I know it like touched on constitution, but probably wasn't like the answer you were looking for.
That was amazing.
Cool.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, no, it's so true. Like, um, Yeah, me and my partner, we actually were living in Guatemala for about 6 months while I was teaching for different schools down there. And we were in San Marcos, and I'm sure you've been on the hippie highway. And both of us had a really hard time walking that road. And one day I came home after going to just pick up some bread, and I was like, if I hear one more person explain to me about how their heart chakra was exploding from that cacao ceremony, I'm going to gouge out my eyes with a spoon and put them in my ears.
Yeah.
And it was intense, but yeah, it's really difficult in, again, working in this, if industry, if you want to call it that, the science of yoga, that there are so many people who are drawn here for spirituality, and they already have those constitutions that don't allow them to be as grounded in this like human body. But it's like, this is what we were given, is this human body. So why are we just trying to disconnect from it all the time or dissociate from it? How about we use it as a tool to connect deeper with ourselves, and to find those different planes of being in the body, right? So thank you so much for explaining the koshas in that way. I've literally never heard anyone explain it in that way. So thank you so much. And now that intrigues me, I would love to hear you explain the gunas as well from this Western medicine approach. Would you be
Okay.
willing to do that?
Yeah, yeah. The gunas are ones that I'm still working with. There's still a few that I'm kind of like, okay, how can I that I don't fully understand or haven't like fully translated yet. Um, so the gunas, wow, I have this whole presentation where we look at like these three kind of like forces that create everything manifest and unmanifest. So then that puts me into this whole existential place of like, okay, first of all, what does this mean? Again, coming from a Vata place, there's such a like a big a buzzword around manifestation and like charging people for how to manifest and all of this, and sure, it's great, but like this isn't new. None of this is new. First of all, look at the sutras, okay? And then the Bhagavad Gita speaks about the gunas quite clearly. And then even start to like look back to Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. Like this is not new. This has been around for a very long time. And I mean, speak it into existence is cute and all, but there's more to it to create something. So the gunas are they make up everything, and they're actually a part of like Maya. And Maya means made up of. It's often translated to like the illusion. So I mean that works, right? That's the same thing, made up of or illusion. And manifest and unmanifest. So then that brings us to Purusha and Prakriti, right? Purusha being the knower, and then Prakriti being the known. Purusha being a part of like who are you really? You know, you're not your body. You're in a body, you have a body, you're not your emotion system has thoughts. So like if you're not these things, then who are you? And you even said it, like there's a space where people come into spirituality so they can completely bypass. Matt Kahn, I don't think he came up with it, but he says it a lot. He says, you are not a human having a spiritual experience. You are a spirit having a human experience. So as much as you want to be enlightened, if you don't include your body in that experience, then you're just creating more karma to come back, more body to come back, to continue in this like earth school, because this is where it's at. And actually, if you start to pay attention, it's talking to you all the time. I kind of brought that up in the last piece that I was talking about, is like it's telling you. The thing is, do you speak the same language? And then now in modern day society, unfortunately, with Western science, one thing that we do is that it's like, oh, you have anxiety. Well, let's just quiet that down. Instead of listening to what your body's trying to tell you, we're just gonna just shut it down. Let's just like not listen to it at all. So back to the gunas. The gunas like are here as a way to help us come to enlightenment. That's what they're here for. And so if they're manifest and unmanifest, well, what does unmanifest mean? So then that sent me down like this wormhole or this rabbit hole of like, well, what's unmanifest? And that's like, it's like everything we know and everything that we don't know. Manifest is like what's here physically in front of us, and then unmanifest hasn't yet become physical. And when we start to look at manifestation, right, we talk about thoughts being things. They go from no thing to something. And that's like a whole thing. And I can talk about that forever and ever and ever because I love that as well. So the gunas are the physical, they're the manifestation of all the things that haven't yet manifested. So we can actually take the gunas and learn more about them. And this is where when I first started learning, I would get like attached, like sattva, right? We have sattva. Well, isn't that the best guna? Sattva is like spirituality. It's like everything that's great, right? And then we have rajas, which I know very well because rajas is like fits with the pitta. And it's full on just like, but also we need it because it's action, right? It's transformation. It's like the next step or the next space that takes us to, if we want manifestation, we need rajas. And then tamas has always been like the worst. Tamas is like bad. I don't ever want tamas because then what does that mean? Like, it's the inert, it's the chill. It comes with a bad rap, I think. Yet what I realized is I was like looking into this as we need it all. Like, sure, I call sattva like being in flow. And I know, again, more buzzwords that sometimes etherical people say, but sometimes I'm like, are you just saying that? Like, what really is being in flow? And for me, that's when I'm able to see, like, I'm able to see divinity. I'm able to see like how everything actually isn't by mistake. And though I would call it magical, it's not necessarily magical. It's pretty normal. Because when the veil drops, I can see that everything's actually like working just as it's supposed to. And I think even before recording, I had said about it, like sometimes I need reminders that I can't do as good a job as God can. Right? If I planned it, there'd be lots more naked people, but it would be a lot more selfish and a lot more limited by my nervous system of how I would create my life. And there are little like chess pieces that I wouldn't see or put into place appropriately. It's like, well, I know that mushrooms are tamasic and I don't like mushrooms. So I'm like, well, then Thomas is the worst. And again, my pitta nature is like very anti-tamas. Yet if we look at, I think, the flow of life, which again, I can bring back to science, right? In physics, the laws of physics are the only laws in the world that haven't been proven wrong. And therefore, they're the only laws by deduction that are correct. And one of them is that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And if you look at your life, you can actually maybe even piece that together, right? For a lot of people, this is like a roller coaster life. This is where highs are so high that your lows are going to be incredibly low. And so coming back to the sutras, coming back to the yamas and the niyamas, right? There is one precept that is called santosha. And santosha translates to like literally contentment. And that idea is to like, if we have high highs, then we're going to have low lows. But if we can come to this middle path, that's what they call it in Buddhism, then the highs and the lows aren't going to be as polarized as if we can come back to this place. And in this place is where we can find that sometimes, sure, we are in flow and everything is just going great. And you turn around and like, you want this thing and there it is. And you turn on the radio and you think of this song and there it is. And you think of this person and they call you and like, you want this thing and it pops up. You take the breadcrumbs from the universe. Yet when that breadcrumb shows up, like you have to have and take action. Because if you don't take action, then the flow doesn't continue. So the rajas is really important in order to like kick our butts to get up and get going. It's like raising your arms over your head in a yoga pose. It's different it's the flower blooming. Like there's so many different aspects of rajas that we need. And then there's the opposite of like being out of balance. And I think that's what yoga is all about, is like being in balance. That's where we find perfect health. That's where we find presence. And that's what I would call sattva. And so after we've used rajas quite some time, I mean, we need to chill. We already are learning this about our nervous system. Post-modern society is just like go, 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 go. And being in this chronic state of fight or flight is actually damaging. This is why so many people are unhealthy. And I'm not even going to get into that one. But what we're realizing now is like autoimmune disorders are a part of this this unhealthy kind of living that's starting to happen. And every single chronic ailment out there has been linked to stress. Every single one. Heart disease, diabetes, like if it's a chronic ailment, it's because your body has been pumping steroids and adrenaline into it pretty much nonstop. And that breaks down the body. And then when that breaks down the body and you have a reaction, you go to the hospital or you go to your doctor, and guess what we prescribe you? We prescribe you more steroids, more adrenaline, more ways that actually degrade the body even more. So without tamas, degradation happens to be out of balance in rajas. So if you bring the constitutions together with the gunas, unfortunately, I think like if you try to match them perfectly, like rajas is pitta, so tamas is kapha, that means sattva is vata, right? And I see how you can be out of balance in all of those and none of that be healthy. So sattva to me is like balance, but it's also a really important part of the cycle, right? A lot of people come in and think like if I'm tridoshic, then I'm healthy. But if somebody's tridoshic and they're not supposed to be, they're out of balance in their constitution and they're going to have troubles. None of this is where we're supposed to be, of like trying to be the best and the most balanced. That's like just right there is being out of balance right there. That's being rajasic. So I know it doesn't like necessarily come back to the human body, but like when we hit Kavalya, when we hit like liberation or moksha or samadhi or whatever that looks like, the gunas cease. And that always comes back to the nervous system to me. So I'll finish with this little rant of like, if we look at our nervous system, how do we know that like what we see is the same thing? Because you don't actually see through your eyes, right? Your eyes are windows that let light in, and then there's like these rods and these cones, and like there's this whole thing that happens. It's actually an electrical signal in your brain. So you see with your brain. Okay, it's the same with your ears. Your ears you do not hear through. Your ears are shaped in order to bring sound waves into a certain canal, which then starts to vibrate those three bones. I don't know if you remember them from high school, but there's like the stirrup, the anvil, or I forget, the hammer, I think. And so those three bones vibrate. And then that sends a vibration to the cochlear part of the ear, which is connected to the brain, which sends an electrical signal. So again, you don't hear with your ears, you hear with your brain. So what we know is that like, and your brain is your nervous system. So how do we know that, like, if we're both looking at my shirt and it's this bright, bright orange color, that we're seeing the same color? How do we know that looking at, my glasses, we're seeing the exact same thing? We don't know, because outside of our nervous system, everything is vibrating atoms. That's what it is. If we look under an electron microscope and we take a piece of the floor and a piece of my flesh, they look the same. They're vibrating atoms. And I may be wrong with dates and stuff like that, but I'm not wrong with the fact is that prior to the 1500s, there was no word for the color blue. What? Wait, hold on. Like, how is that? So for every year, pre-Christ, post-Christ, whatever all of that is, to the 1500s, there was no color blue. It was different shades of green. The sky was not blue. The ocean was not blue. Like, okay, and then what happened? Like, all of a sudden some guy says, like, oh, look, that's not green, that's blue. And then all of a sudden everybody else saw blue. And now the word azul pops up. And then more like shades of blue happen. So what does that mean? Was blue in existence or was it not? And this is one of the questions that comes up. So we have like a veil of illusion, and that veil of illusion is created with the gunas. And a lot of that is affected by our nervous system. So we don't know that we're saying the same things. I mean, seeing the same things. Perspective is a huge part of how we all operate in this world, from a place of ego, which is then the second klesha, right? The first one being avidya, or ignorance to who you truly are. So when you're ignorant to who you truly are, then you identify, unfortunately, as your ego. If you think about your nervous system being your ego, this really, really matches up. And so the gunas are illusion, completely manifest and unmanifest from our nervous systems. And one of the things, Deborah Adele wrote a book called The Yamas and the Niyamas, and she uses a lot of examples in there. And one of them is like, it's talking about how many fish are in a koi pond. And he says, he says to him, how many fish are in the pond? How many koi? And he says, 8. And then he says, well, how many ponds? And he's like, well, 1. And he's like, no, 8 fish, 8 ponds. And so it's similar with this world, right? It's similar with our ideas of what is God. It's like, if there are 10 billion people, there are 10 billion different versions of this world. There are 10 billion different versions of God. And no wonder, like, in general. And yeah, I think that's where I'm going to stop.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like we could easily spend a whole day talking here.
Right?
Um, I love listening to all of the wisdom that you've been sharing.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, I love Deborah Adele's book on the yamas and the niyamas. It's such a potent one. She also just wrote one on the kleshas, which I just bought, but I haven't read it yet, and I'm really excited to read it. So, forewarning, if you're able
Okay.
to order books to Costa Rica, that might be the next one on the list.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for all of that. I think that's so potent and really taps into my intention for this podcast, because
Right.
one thing I've really noticed through my personal journey is that in the Western world, it feels like we're offered a lot of band-aids and not a lot of opportunity to really get to the root of those imbalances, whether that be physical, mental, spiritual, whatever it is. And for me, it has been a lot of bypassing. And so that's exactly why I wanted to create this podcast, and exactly what called me to the path of yoga was um, finding a science that really allows me to sit with myself and explore my inner world and notice what truths it is that I already hold within. And one thing that you had brought up a few times that I really 100% believe in and agree with you is that the power of our mind is immense, and it's something that we as humans can't even fathom. Um, there's in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, my favorite quote from there is, nothing happens in the body without it happening in the mind first. And I bring that up a lot during teacher trainings and different things that I host as well, because I think that that is such a potent and such a truthful quote. I think that that really supports everything that you just talked about with the nervous system and the mind, and how we really can fall victim to the mind, if that's maybe a way to say it. And again, that's what I've really noticed that the path of yoga has offered, is an ability to learn to control the mind, right? Even Patanjali in the sutras, in his very like second sutra, what is yoga? It's the stopping of the mind stuff, right? And when we are able to find that orientation for our mind, then that flow state can occur that you were talking about, right? So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And yeah, it's just been such an honor to have you on here and have you share all of your wisdom. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, babe. I'm so stoked that you're offering this. And like again, of course I would be because I've always found you, in my personal opinion, to be a little more grounded as well and real. And so I think that the more of us that are coming from a grounded place, which is the most basic and most advanced spiritual practice there is, to be grounded, then the more helpful it'll be of like navigating this world is like, oh yeah, like I'm human and it's okay. I'm fucked up. It's okay. Like I am not perfect. Good.
Yeah, thank you. It's so intense being out there and meeting all these people that um I tell people often, I meet people who the one of the very first things they'll tell me is, "Oh, I'm healed." And I'll be like, whoa, that's a huge red flag. And I'll turn around and run
Yeah.
in the opposite direction. So thank you for that. And yeah, I feel the exact same way about you. So thank you for all of your beautiful energy and offerings that you bring to this world and in your grounded being. And yeah, it's been really potent getting to witness part of your story unfold in the short time I've known you. So thank you again for saying yes and being on here.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, friends, for tuning in, and thank you, Colin, for your beautiful wisdom. What a potent conversation that was. So much beautiful wisdom being passed forth. So, thank you. If you would like to stay in touch with Colin, you can find her on Instagram at Friction Yoga. That's spelled FRIKSHUHN_yoga. On all other social media platforms, you can find her with that same spelling of Friction Yoga and Coaching, and TikTok at Friction Yoga. Her website is www.friction.com. Again, that's spelled www.frikshuhn.com. She offers continuing education courses in a wide range of specialties with a focus on the body, alignment, and anatomical science. She also offers a 300-hour build your own yoga teacher training and a kick-ass yogapreneurs business coaching. My name is Danya. I am the lead facilitator and founder of Wild Song Yoga. It has been an absolute honor and blessing being here with you in this space. So thank you again for supporting, for choosing to tune in, and for listening to all of these beautiful, wise keepers that we are blessed with on this earth. From my heart to yours, namaste. My name is Danya Buak. I am the lead facilitator and founder of Wild Song Yoga School. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for stepping into this space of learning and growing with these potent wisdom keepers. It is a deep honor and a deep blessing to be here curating and magically weaving all of this knowledge for you. So thank you so much. From my heart to each and every one of yours, namaste.